say my name's Tony Cottrell. It's Alan Bly, our lead writer at Forgeworld. There's no presentation, it's just a Q&A session today. It's a little bit of a noisy atmosphere, so we're going to have to, if you're going to ask a question, pop your hand up, and if you can speak loudly, then it enables everybody else to hear what you're asking. Otherwise, you just get the answer, which might be confusing to some people. Alan and I will try and speak loudly. If you can't hear us, please let us know. So that's the score. So if people would like to ask a question, pop your hand up, and we'll make a start. Gentlemen, here.
When's the bulk pod coming up for the Thunderhawks Transporter?
When's the pod coming out? It's a very good question, actually. We were going to do a pod for it a while back, which enabled us to land troops and bikes and stuff like that. There was ones that actually started. I would find Owen Brannan and ask him when it's coming out, because he's hidden it somewhere.
I'll ask you again.
Ask him again. Demand a date from him. And then when you've got that date, can you come and tell me, please? Superb. Right, that's the first question. Next question. Who else for a question? It's going to be really short if you don't ask a question.
Have you got any plans to do any night times or any times?
Night types. It's alright, we've got one here. Night type question first. I think it's something we'd like to revisit at a certain time. Now, not necessarily with Forgeworld, who knows, but we'd probably do something on it. So I think nights would be nice to introduce, and it would give us a walker really between their sort of dreadnought size and scout time, which I think would be good. But nothing has been started, at least at our end anyway. I'm going to go for this gentleman here.
The Thunderfire cannon is a synchronized Beethoven codex. Is that deliberate?
In a general sense, I didn't write the codex, so I can't tell you the exact answer, but between the different marine codexes, sort of the standard Space Marine Codex, the Space Marine Blood Angels, etc., they don't have absolute parity of equipment. This reflects their particular style of war and also their particular histories within the 40k universe. So sometimes it's not a question of a kind of gamist side of it where we decide somebody can have something else. It's just that whether or not things are appropriate for them. And this is something we do in Forgeworld with our own stuff as well. I mean, the classic example of that on Forgeworld side is not to do with Marines, it's to do with what we decided that the Death Corps Creed would have by way of English Standard Imperial Guard, equipment and war machines. And we took, the steps like and said, well, because of the way they fight, they're just not going to have access to Chimera, which is a very standard piece of Imperial Guard kit. And the same thing happens generally in design when you go, well, in terms of Space Wars, do Space Wars fight like this? Is this appropriate to that? And in a very practical way, it's nice as well for people to have genuine difference in their army lists, even though they might otherwise be quite similar. And so, for example, the Blood Angels get the Furiosa Dreadnoughts, and obviously the Space Force have their own crazy kit as well. I'm pretty sure some of the standard Space Marine sort of armies out there following the codes will go, well, that's right. But what it enables us to do is provide variety within otherwise what would be very similar things. That's kind of the design idea.
With the Space Marine chapter Iron Hands, personally I think that there's a lot that you could do with it. With their close ties to the Mechanicus, their rather aggressive nature, and all of their bionics works. Do you reckon Forgeworld would ever branch into that chapter to do more on them?
It's possible. The next chapter for the next Imperial Armour book we'll be doing is Minotaurs, and that's why we've done Minotaurs characters. So it's possible we'll try and pick out some of the other chapters and do specific things for them and try and build them up. But we have to really try and do one at a time. I don't want to do them all loosely and very thin in terms of IP and background. I prefer we get into some depth. So not quite probably at the moment.
Okay.
Just on this kind of side point, like you probably already know this, but I'll tell you anyway. The second Banner book has the Sons of Medusa in there, which are an Iron Hands successor, and they have their own special character in there, which you could quite happily port over into an Iron Hands army.
The Technical.
Yeah, Valen Cap.
Yeah. Okay.
Next question.
Got plans to release all the Banner characters as models?
I'm not sure we're going to get round to doing them all, I'm afraid to say. There's always probably more than we'd like than we can do. We'd always like to do them. So people are just going to have to read the descriptions and get converted to a few of the other ones.
We kind of knew this would be the case anyway, which is why when we were doing the design of the work for the actual characters, it was very important to us that every chapter had their own character, just for people playing the campaign and the immersiveness of it. But we tried to not make them too wacky, so that you could sort of convert or kit bash your own versions without vast difficulty. And we tried to lay in quite a lot of description about them physically and what they were carrying, just to enable people to do that. But hopefully it's more of an opportunity than not.
Would you ever do the Primarchs as display models, if not as ruled models?
I think we've got to think about with the Primarchs is their appropriateness to do in the 41st millennium. We occasionally have done models which are display only models, and they're more sort of like the events models we do and things like that. Whether we'll ever get, I mean, it'd be nice to do the Primarchs. And I'm sure at some time, you never know, they might get some models of them, but it is a big undertaking if we're trying to introduce them to where they sit as gaming models, and I think display models is the other alternative. But you know, even if you do display models, I can't see everybody. The first question I'm going to get the day we do one as a display model is, when are the rules going to come out for it? So it's, we'll see, but you know, it's a big decision, I think. Fingers crossed. Yeah.
I think you mentioned Minotaurs as the next Marines in the next armour. Would I be correct in thinking of Necrons are in there with them?
Yes, we are probably doing. Originally, we were going to do a slightly different book, but we've changed what Imperial Armour 12 is going to be. Partially because we think we ought to try and cover the Necrons, otherwise we're not going to get around to them for a bit. So the background really. Well, Alan will tell you a bit about the story on that.
Yeah. It's very early stages with this one, yeah. But it's just kind of moved in front of the kids. To give you the wider story, we've got 3 or 4 really good ideas that have worked up to quite a considerable degree of detail for books to do. One of which is the Prison Planet and the Chaos, which is what we were telling people, the Morrisons. And that's not been sort of done away with, but it's kind of fallen back in the shape because the Necron kind of thing. Apart from actually getting loads and loads of requests for Necrons, because we have at the minute a fairly sparse range compared to what we took and what we say have something like the Tau or the Orcs. So it's something we could really do with addressing and it would be quite popular. And so that's one thing that's brought it to the fore. But the idea for that one is something, and again this is quite early stage, but it's something we've not quite done before, which is, if you take the idea that we always say to people in the 40k in general that it is a galaxy of war, it is a continuous heaping mass of conflict and bloodshed across the stars, scant peace. But what we often do is then only show you a very small part of it, not how it links up to other spheres of rolling conflicts and the way the Imperium works and that kind of thing. So my kind of idea for this is, and the Minotaurs will play a very strong part in this that we kind of want to keep focusing. There's a broader narrative going on of the war that is encompassing an entire sector of Imperial space. And it's kind of an analogy is a snapshot on one day, on 1 hour, on this volume of space, these thousands of stars, which are at war and why, and how that entire sort of cataclysm of war revolves. And the major threat here is the Necrons, will be a rising Necron menace in this area. And in essence, the stars will be going out in sequence. And we're going to have the Imperium rallying to the defence, using the Minotaurs as very much a surgical strike force. And the Minotaurs fit this perfectly with the fleet-based chapter, with strong connections to the central control of the Imperium. So, in essence, they're asked to deal with the hearts of the problem, not to giving it again away. But there's a much wider scope of war with bits of Imperial Guard in there, some other bits and pieces. And that we may not detail it in terms of models or very slow development, we'll also say, well, this is how it works. The enemy is sweeping, and over here, Orcs will become active because the troops are down, they're being pushed into another area. These parts will be lost control. On this perfectly good, useful planet, it's in the way. So the defenders are not reinforced and told to hold the last man and die for the Imperium, because their death then allows the rest of forces together, and they're just unlucky today. Sort of gives that kind of grand sweep of a war in a way that we don't usually do. And obviously zoom in and give some great details and parts of it, bring out the heroism and the action, but also try and, in a way that we haven't done before, kind of do this, again, an analogy, maybe not an appropriate one, but is almost a slice of pig. If you were to sever a slice of the war pig, of the Imperium, and count the layers, really. So that's kind of where we're going with the Necron, but the Necron is great today. A very key part of the Imperial counterattack will be command.
Next question, gentleman in the red.
I couldn't quite hear you then. You say you're going to add more of the Necron range with the next book? Or just rules?
No, there'll be new models as well. It's very early stages at the moment. If you, the best person to speak to about Necrons and stuff is probably Will Hayes over there after once we're finished. Just have a chat with him, but he's only just started working on it because we've been catching up with some of the Space Marine stuff. So we've got some concepts to do. And we'd like to do something quite big for the Necrons. We'll see if we've got time to do that. But, gentlemen.
I think it was earlier in the year I saw some concept art for Elysian Stormtroopers. I'm not sure if it was like official Forgeworld concept art or just fan based, but is there anything in the works for that type of thing?
There isn't any additional Elysians over the top of what we have currently.
Okay.
Anything for any other guard regiments?
There'll always be new stuff for the Imperial Guard every year, but again, we haven't started specifically working on some stuff. But there will probably be some Imperial Guard in the next Imperial Army book. So.
And in terms of the Imperial Navy, you can see a sort of a progress model down over there. It's a new strike fighter model, the Avenger that he's working on. It's pretty cool.
We get asked this every year, but is there any chance of perhaps expanding the Adeptus Mechanicus, maybe Legio Cybernetica robots, that sort of thing? Is it a case of you would like to, but there is no...
Sorry, is it a case of...
Is it a case of you'd like to, but there is no plans for it?
There's been various plans of trying to be able to do something with Adeptus Mechanicus and work it in. Originally, we were going to do, I think, in Prax at one time.
Yeah.
But it just wasn't with doing the whole of the creed. There just wasn't time. I think that we'd like to try and get some Adeptus Mechanicus stuff probably within the next 2 or 3 books, but we'll have to wait and see. We've got various ideas on how we might be able to do that. I don't want to elaborate really on those here, but we have thought about it. What you're not going to necessarily see is an Adeptus Mechanicus whole army or stuff like that. We're talking more about contingent stuff.
Go back to the Imperial Guard. It's a very similar situation to the Death Guard. You haven't got anything necessarily quite like just yet.
It depends who ends up fighting with the Necrons, really.
And actually, Death Guard versus Necrons would be quite cool. Death Creed rather than Death Guard. Death Creed against Necrons. Spectre of Shadow of Death, people that fear nothing. It's the classic match.
So it's possible they may be resurrected. We all like Death Guard Greeks, and they haven't been around for a bit. They've been a bit Elysian and Canadians, which are sort of normal Imperial Guard rather than the true guys, true might Imperial.
Sort of going into Death Core Creek, those your trench systems, I think, are no longer available on the website. Is that due to the molds not being viable anymore, or is it just due to the sheer amount of range? Obviously, things drop off.
I mean, certain things have to drop out of the range every year because we can't keep everything in there. Otherwise, we'd end up with 20,000 models in a few years if we can't really hold the name of the most. The terrain has suffered a bit because of 2 reasons. Firstly, terrain is difficult to sell in the quantities and the price you need to sell it for outside of a time where it's related to a story. It's just that people are never willing, I absolutely understand this, but never willing to pay the amount that we really should charge for terrain because of the amount of time it takes to make and design and the amount of materials it takes. So what that means is that certain things, and that includes a lot of the terrain for both Warhammer and 40k, some of those lines have now been dropped.